Mary Linton stepped barefoot onto her porch with an empty pail and yesterday's dress clinging to her hips. The red gingham had faded to rust, and one sleeve hung loose from a ripped seam. Her hair was a wild braid of night and wind, black as a crow's wing, streaked with A. She moved like someone who had nothing to prove and nowhere better to be. Beyond her porch, the land stretched open and quiet, an old breathing thing. Wind stirred the brittle grass, and in the sky, a hawk circled slow, casting its shadow across the scrub and the scorched trail that led to the well. From the porch across the way, Silas Boone watched her. He hadn't meant to. He'd risen early, same as always, to split kindling and feed the chickens. And there she was again, walking to the well with that iron pail, hips swaying slightly, chin lifted like she dared the town to whisper again. Her presence stirred the still morning, like smoke curling in a church. Silas sipped from his tin mug, keeping one eye on her and the other on the frost that hadn't yet melted off the ground. He wasn't a man given to curiosity, not since Anna died. But Mary Linton was hard to look away from, not for her beauty, though she had that too, but for the hush she carried. A hush different than grief, more defiant, more alive. Mary heard the gossip, of course. How could she not? It rode the wind in Sunawee like pollen, settling in every ear. She sang for coin. She let men in the back rooms. She drank, swore, bled red as any outlaw. Mary never corrected them. She had tried once years ago, when she came back to bury her aunt and take over the broken ranch she'd left behind at 17. But the town had already made up its mind. She was too wild, too proud, too touched by sin. Let them talk, she thought. Let them close their doors when she passed. The only mouths she fed were her own and the half-wild dog that followed her from the barn to the front porch each night. She owed nothing to Sunawee, and less to its judgment. But still, some mornings hurt more than others. At the well, her hands wrapped around the pump. She gave it a few hard pulls, and the bucket clanked loud as water gushed. Her breath puffed in white clouds. Her back ached from last night's chopping wood, and a bruise bloomed along her arm from hauling feed bags. She ignored both, lifted the pail, and made the slow walk back, refusing to look toward the Boone Ranch. She didn't need their kindness, didn't want their pity. She didn't know Silas had watched her. He watched her again that afternoon, when his son, Elias, chased a chicken through the fence and into her yard. "Get back here, you feather-brained devil." Elias shouted barefoot, grinning in all legs. He was 12 and slight for his age, with a colic that never laid flat and a heart that hadn't hardened yet. The chicken ducked under Mary's porch. Mary emerged from the barn, wiping her hands on her trousers. She wore men's boots and a shirt too big for her frame. Her braid had come undone, and straw clung to her back. She looked down at the boy and the bird with equal parts amusement and weariness. "You after that beast?" she asked. Elias startled at the sound of her voice, but didn't run. "Yes, ma'am. She's got a mean streak. Pecked me twice last week. I ain't afraid of her. That makes one of us." She knelt, pulled the hen from under the porch with a practiced hand, and held it out to the boy. He blinked at her. She waited. Finally, he stepped forward, arms out. "Your pa know you're over here?" "Not exactly." "MMM." She handed him the chicken. "Well, don't go blaming me when he starts hollering." "I won't. Thank you, ma'am." She almost smiled. A moment later, boots sounded on the dirt path. Silas appeared, hat low over his brow, voice even. "Elias." "Sorry, Pa," the boy muttered, clutching the chicken. Silas glanced from his son to Mary. "He bothering you?" "No," Mary said. Chicken was worse. Their eyes held for a breath too long. Silas nodded, tipping his hat. Mary nodded back. No more words passed. They left her yard. Mary stood in place a while longer, arms crossed, mouth tight. The breeze had shifted. Something small had changed. Later that week, she noticed her porch step had been fixed. She hadn't asked, hadn't paid. She'd cursed that cracked board a dozen times, but now it held her weight firm and solid, nailed down clean. A craftsman's work, quiet, precise. She knew it was him. That night, she lit a lantern on the porch and left it burning. Silas noticed. In town, the gossip bloomed anew. Miriam Holt, preacher's wife and self-appointed moral compass, took no time to stir the pot. "She's pulling that man in like a snake coils a rabbit," she told the grocer. "Poor Elias," someone whispered near the post office. "Doesn't need that kind of woman around. Lord help the boy if she moves in." Mary heard them. She kept walking. In the dry goods store, the clerk rang her up with a pinched smile. When she reached into her coat for coins, her hand brushed against the pistol holstered to her hip. The smile disappeared. Let them flinch, she thought. Back at home, she found a small pile of firewood stacked neatly beside her door. Not much, just enough to see the night through. She didn't smile, but her throat caught. The wind howled that night. Coyotes cried out from the ridge, and somewhere, something metal slammed loose. Mary lay awake, staring at the rafters. She thought about how Silas Boone hadn't spoken more than 20 words to her. And yet he had nailed her porch, left her wood, let his son near. That kind of silence carried weight. In the days that followed, Elias came by again. He asked about horses, about wolves, about what it meant to live alone. Mary answered with short stories and long silences. "You ever get scared out here?" Elias asked once. "All the time," she replied. He nodded. "Me too." The boy didn't ask what she meant, and she didn't ask why he came. Silas saw his son growing lighter, a little taller, a little steadier in the shoulders, and he knew Mary had something to do with it. Still, he kept his distance. He fixed her fence where it leaned, left tools when hers broke, but never crossed her porch. Until the day the dog barked. Mary stepped outside and saw Elias crying, ankle twisted, halfway between the trees and her yard. He must have fallen. She ran, lifted him, without thinking, carried him inside. The boy clutched her shirt, breathing hard. By the time Silas arrived, dirt on his hands and worry in his voice, she had already bandaged the ankle and brewed tea. Silas stood in her doorway, hat in hand, eyes flicking around her home, modest, patched with care, filled with the smell of cedar and cinnamon. "Thank you," he said. Mary shrugged. "Didn't do much." "You did." He didn't step inside. She didn't invite him. But for a moment, they stood at the threshold of something neither of them could name. When he left, she noticed he touched the doorframe like he might one day knock. That night, she watched the horizon darken from her porch, lantern lit, beside her. The wind softened. Somewhere in the hills, the coyotes were quiet. She didn't believe in omens. Not anymore. But she believed in gestures. In fence boards nailed without asking. In boys who asked too many questions. In men who didn't speak more than they meant. And she believed, maybe just a little, that someone might be watching her. Not to judge, not to claim, just to see. She wrapped her shawl tighter, sat still as dusk wrapped the land, and waited for nothing. But in her chest, something stirred anyway. The clouds hung low that morning, stretched like wool over the hills, casting sinewy in a quiet gray. The kind of stillness that softened footfalls and deepened thoughts. Mary stepped into it without hurry, arms full of laundry, her breath visible in the cold. The dog trailed behind her, ears alert, as if it too sensed the shift in the air. She hung her wash slow, careful with each clothespin. A slip of flannel caught on her thumb and opened a shallow cut, but she didn't flinch. The pain was sharp, honest, easier to tend than the other wounds she carried. Across the fence, Silas watched from behind his barn's open door. He wasn't spying, he told himself that, but observing, the way a man watches whether he doesn't understand. There was a rhythm to her movements, a silence that wasn't empty, but heavy, like a book closed with stories inside. Elias was the first to break it. He appeared from the side of the house, waving a small slingshot in one hand, excitement in the other. "Mary, come see." She turned, half laughing. "What trouble are you stirring now?" "Found a turtle by the creek. I didn't think anything still lived down there." "Come see." She hesitated, looked to the sky. Rain threatened, and her bones ached from the night chill. But Elias's grin tugged at something soft in her. She dropped the last sheet and followed the boy toward the tree line, her dog bounding behind them. Silas stepped out from the barn, ready to call Elias back, but stopped. Watched them disappear together, the woman in worn boots, and the boy too eager to fear her like the town did. At the creek, the turtle turned out to be a rock. Elias laughed, sheepish. Mary dropped to her knees anyway, ran her hands through the muddy bank, and told him how to look for tracks, how to spot coyote scat, how to read the way grass leaned from wind and hoof. "You talk like a trapper," Elias said. "My aunt taught me. She was part Comanche, or claimed to be. Don't know if it was truth or pride, but she lived by the old ways." Her voice gentled. "Kept me alive more than once." "Did you trap animals?" "Sometimes." "Kill them?" She paused. "When I had to." Elias nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Boys in Sunawee grew up quicker than they should. He poked a stick into the mud, thinking, "Your mama ever trap?" "No," he said quietly. "She cooked. Sang a lot. Mostly when Pa wasn't looking." Mary tilted her head. He didn't like her singing. He just got quiet when she did. Like it reminded him of something. Mary didn't press. The boy's truth was folded deep, like her own. But when he turned to her again, there was something new in his eyes. Curiosity, not caution. They walked back slower than they'd come. She limped slightly. Her left knee always ached after rain. Elias didn't mention it. He handed her a stick without a word, and she used it for the rest of the walk. When they reached the ranch, Silas stood at the fence, hands on the top rail, watching. She handed the boy off with a nod, but Silas didn't move. "Thank you," he said, voice low. She didn't respond, just looked at him for a moment longer than necessary, then turned inside. That night, the pain returned, deep in her belly, familiar and cruel. She sat on the floor of her bedroom, back to the bed frame. One hand pressed to her stomach, eyes unfocused. It came in waves, quiet and shattering, and left her breathless. Outside, the wind cried through the slats in the roof. Somewhere in the house, the music box played, just a few soft notes. She'd wounded earlier to feel something other than empty. Now it sounded distant, ghost-like. The child had been born still. That was 7 years ago. A boy. Small, silent. She'd held him anyway, wrapped in a dish towel, alone in a rented room above a saloon in Santa Clara. The midwife had left when the blood wouldn't stop. The man responsible had already fled. No name on the birth paper. No grave marker. Just a clump of desert stone somewhere under the stars. Mary wiped her face with the back of her hand, sharp and angry. She didn't cry for herself anymore. But sometimes, when the pain came back, she let it visit like an old friend who never learned how to leave. Morning broke wet and blue. The ground soaked up the night's rain, and Mary moved stiffly through her chores. She didn't see Elias that day. Instead, she found a bundle left on her porch. Oats, a fresh loaf wrapped in cloth, and a folded note with one word, "Thanks." She stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Ran her fingers over the handwriting. Not a flourish in sight, just steady, slanted script. That night she left the lantern burning again, longer this time. 2 days later, the wind shifted hard. The shutters rattled like bones, and the chimney moaned. A storm was coming. Mary spent the afternoon checking the roof, latching the barn, preparing for the inevitable. She found the corner of the chicken coop had given out. Before she could gather the tools, a knock sounded on the porch. Silas stood there, hammer in one hand, a box of nails in the other. "Coop needs fixing," he said. She stepped aside, without a word. They worked together, mostly in silence. Rain came in slow, then steady, soaking their shoulders, dripping off hats. Mary held the boards while he nailed. She handed him tools without needing to be asked. At one point, she caught him watching her hands, scarred, calloused, precise. "You miss her?" she asked, quiet. Silas didn't answer at first, just kept hammering. When he finally spoke, the words came shaped like stone. "Every day." Mary nodded. "Mine was a son." Silas stopped, lowered the hammer. Didn't make it. Their eyes met in the half-light of the storm. He didn't ask how. She didn't offer. That was enough. They finished in silence. When the coop stood upright and sealed, Silas lifted the tools and looked toward her porch. "I'll leave these with you." "You don't have to." "I want to." The words hung there, fragile and unadorned. Mary looked at him for a long time, then said, "All right." When he left, she stood at the doorway for a while, watching the rain fall in curtains across the field. The dog curled at her feet. The tools rested on the bench like they belonged. She didn't light the lantern that night. She didn't need to. The following morning brought sunlight, bright and cleansing. She sat on her porch with a tin cup of coffee, the steam curling into the dawn. Her back ached, her hands were sore, and the world still judged her with every glance. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like someone had seen her and not turned away. Elias came again that afternoon with a bruised shin and a nervous story about climbing a tree. She fixed him up without scolding. "You gonna tell your pa?" He shook his head. "He'll find out anyway. Not if you don't tell." She raised a brow. "That how it works?" He grinned. "Sometimes." She didn't promise anything, just handed him a cookie and ruffled his hair. He looked surprised, then proud. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "What?" "Your boy being gone." Mary's heart clenched. The words had come so soft, but so sudden. "Yes," she said. No hesitation. "Some days more than others." Elias nodded, chewing. "I think Pa still talks to Ma sometimes." Mary looked toward the Boone house. The light in the window. The crooked line of fence. "I believe it." As the sun dipped low, casting long orange shadows across the yard, Silas walked over with a shovel and 2 flower bulbs in hand. "They're wild iris," he said. "Don't bloom much, but when they do, they last." She took one. "Where you want it?" He gestured toward the fence between their lands. Not quite hers. Not quite his. They dug in silence, 2 feet apart, the earth damp and dark between them. As the last roots settled in, Silas turned to her. "I know they talk. I hear it too," she said. His mouth twitched. "Let 'em." The sun slipped behind the hills. The air cooled. And for a moment, the world held still, not in judgment, but in grace. Mary rose, brushed dirt from her skirt, and looked at the man beside her. Grief in his eyes, quiet in his bones. And yet he stayed. She touched his arm, light as breath. Just once. Then walked back to her porch, alone, but not quite as alone as before. The wind carried a scent of smoke before anyone saw the flames. It threaded through the cottonwoods and crept beneath doors, whispering warnings only the land understood. Mary caught it first, standing at her clothesline with pins clenched between her teeth. She paused, eyes narrowing toward the western ridge. Smoke rose like a phantom, thin but sure, against the cloudless sky. She dropped the laundry and ran. At the Boone Ranch, Elias was already outside, pointing. "It's near the gulch," he shouted, his voice thinned by distance and fear. Mary didn't wait. She vaulted her fence and sprinted toward them. Silas was in the barn, struggling to get the mule hitched. The wind had turned sharp, gusting wild and dry. "North pasture might go next," Mary said breathlessly, arriving at the fence line. Her cheeks were flushed with heat and wind, and her sleeves were rolled past the elbow. Silas nodded. No panic in his face, just the quick math of survival. "Can you take Elias to town?" "No. We need every hand." His gaze flicked to his son. Elias stood ready, jaw clenched, boots already dusted. "I can haul water," the boy said. Mary looked at Silas. "Let him." For the next hour, they worked without pause, hauling buckets, soaking blankets, herding the goats to the creek. The fire crept fast but low, licking at brush and fence posts, driven by wind more than fury. Mary beat it back from the chicken coop with a wet feed sack, arms aching, eyes stinging. At one point, Silas found her at the barn wall, trying to unhinge the door where smoke had thickened. "You don't have to do this," he said. She didn't answer, just handed him a second bucket. When the flames finally broke and the wind shifted, what remained was a patch of scorched grass, 3 blackened fence posts, and a few frightened animals. No lives lost. No homes taken. They sat together on the ground afterward, muddy, bruised, steam rising from their clothes. Elias leaned against his father's side, half asleep. Mary reached for a canteen and took a long, slow drink. then passed it to Silas without looking at him. Could have been worse, she said. He nodded. Could have been everything. She laughed, soft and surprised. You always talk in riddles? Only when tired. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time, just tired and real. When the sheriff came by later to check the damage, he looked from Silas to Mary and raised a brow. She held the west line, Silas said, before the man could ask. Mary said nothing. She never did, when credit came. The next day, Miriam Holt's voice carried loud through the general store. She's cursing this town, that one. Fire came from the ridge near her land. She saved the Boone's livestock, the shopkeep muttered, half under his breath. Miriam narrowed her eyes. It's always fire and ruin where she walks. That's not a coincidence. Outside, Mary waited with her coffee tin and sugar bag, her back turned. But the words drifted through the screen door like smoke. She didn't flinch. Didn't go inside either. Later, she found wildflowers laid across her porch, bluebells, 3 of them, pressed between 2 pieces of cedar bark. Elias's doing, no doubt. She smiled with her eyes only. As summer crept toward its end, things shifted in subtle ways. Elias came more often, with questions or chores or no reason at all. Silas followed once, bringing spare nails and an extra kettle. Mary let them both in. She offered biscuits. Let Elias feed the chickens. Let Silas replace the stovepipe elbow that had rusted through without asking. You always take care of things that aren't yours, she asked. He shrugged. Not always. She smiled. Then why now? His hands didn't pause. Because you do the same. That night, as thunder muttered over the hills and light flickered far away, Mary pulled out her old sewing kit and stitched up the torn hem on her best dress. Not because she planned to wear it, but because the act of mending something felt like hope. The next Sunday, the church bells rang without her. Mary didn't attend. Never had. But from her porch, she could see the townsfolk walking back from service. Miriam leading with her chin high, others trailing behind like judgment made flesh. As they passed her fence, some glanced her way. One woman even nodded. Mary didn't return it. Later, Elias stopped by with a bruised knuckle. What happened? She asked, crouching to examine it. Town boys said something about you. I told them they were wrong. Her hands froze. You didn't need to do that. They were wrong. Mary wrapped his hand in a rag soaked in cold water, the gesture slow, precise. Her voice stayed steady, though her heart cracked a little. You're a good boy, she said. He looked at her, eyes too serious for 12. They said you weren't a mother. I'm not. You could be. Silas came by that evening to retrieve his son. Mary stood with her arms folded, something unreadable in her posture. He's fighting on my behalf now, she said. Silas looked at Elias, then back at her. He fights for what he believes in. Mary glanced down. He shouldn't have to. Silas didn't answer. Instead, he took off his hat and held it to his chest. The gesture was plain, reverent. You make him feel safe, he said. Mary swallowed hard. I didn't mean to. I'm glad you did. They stood in the twilight, neither moving. That night, she left the door unlatched. Not as an invitation, just as proof, to herself maybe, that the world had shifted. Days passed. The air turned cooler. Rain came soft and slow, dotting the dry earth like memory. Silas began repairing the long fence between their lands. Mary offered to help. He didn't argue. They worked shoulder to shoulder, sharing tools and silences. Sometimes Elias joined. Other times, it was just them. No need for explanations. The rhythm of hammer and nail spoke louder than words. At one point, Mary leaned against a post and looked at him. Why haven't you asked? About what? Whatever the town says. Why I left. Why I came back. Silas wiped sweat from his brow. Would you tell me? Maybe. Then I'll wait. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. That's the right answer. By the final stretch of fence, they worked in sync, her holding, him nailing, then switching without a word. When the last board went up, she stood back and studied it. Looks like a boundary. Looks like a bridge, he replied. She turned toward him. You always talk like a preacher. No. Just a rancher who's learned what not to say. I was 16, she said suddenly. When I left, he didn't interrupt. There was a man, much older. He offered me music and promises. Took more than he gave. Left me with grief and a town that spat in my face. Silas didn't speak. Just watched her, eyes steady. I came back to bury my aunt. Thought maybe I could outrun the shame. You didn't bring shame, he said. You brought yourself. She blinked once. Then looked away. He placed a hand on the fence. You don't owe me anything, Mary. I know. But I'm here. She didn't answer, but the wind shifted, soft and warm, like the start of something true. The next morning, the first iris bloomed where they'd planted them, pale purple and trembling in the breeze. A quiet announcement. Mary crouched to touch its petals, then straightened, dusted her palms, and turned toward the Boone Ranch, and smiled. The thunder cracked early that morning, sharp and close, like the hills themselves were warning. Mary woke with her hand already at the knife beneath her pillow, heart pounding, as though she'd been chased in a dream. But the room was still, just the wind outside and the uneasy breath of the land before something breaks. The dog was already growling low when she stepped out onto the porch. From the road, dust rose. 5 riders, town men, the preacher's boy among them, grown thick with pride and foolishness, and Miriam's nephew, the one who called Mary a curse loud enough for her to hear last week at the feed store. They didn't come with torches or guns drawn, but their posture was the same as every mob dressed in civility. The tight reins, the unspoken message, the wide circle of their arrival, as though her land itself was tainted. Mary stood tall, shawl wrapped over her shoulders, boots planted. Morning, she said, voice even. The preacher's boy spat. Town's meeting. Figured you ought to be told. She folded her arms. And why would the town want me there? You know why. He looked back at the others, then fixed his eyes on her. Too many folks think you don't belong here, that you're setting a bad example. Mary didn't blink. For whom? For the boy. For Silas. For every child who's seen you walk around with your chin up like nothing ever happened. She stepped down from the porch, the old wood creaking beneath her. Nothing ever happened, she repeated, quiet. That what you think? You're poison, he said, the words brittle with self-righteousness. Mary's mouth curved, not a smile, but something colder. I've been called worse by better men. The other riders shifted, uneasy now. They hadn't expected her to stand so still, so calm. Like fire looking at kindling and knowing it wouldn't spread. Town's voting, one of them muttered. Supper at the hall. Folks'll speak their mind. She looked down at her hands, then back at them. Let M. The men rode off with more dust than purpose. She stood alone a long time, listening to the wind pick up again. By noon, the word had reached the Boone Ranch. Elias came running, breathless, cheeks flushed. They're going to make you leave, he gasped. I heard it at the store. Miss Miriam says you've poisoned everything. Mary wiped her hands on her apron. She's just afraid. Afraid of what? That I won't leave. Silas arrived an hour later, slow and deliberate. He didn't knock. He just stood at her fence and waited. She met him there, arms crossed, sun high above them. She's stirring him again, she said. I know. They'll try to vote me out. I won't let them. Mary gave him a long look, her voice quiet. You don't get to fight my battles. Don't need to. Just want to stand beside you while you fight. Her eyes softened. That's a mighty fine thing to say, Silas Boone. It's not words I'm offering, he said. It's place. It's soil. It's a home. She looked past him to the hills, the way the light fell across the pasture. Then back at him. You sure? He nodded. For a long time now. That night, the town gathered. The supper hall filled with baked bread and sharp glances. Miriam stood at the front, a white lace collar tight at her neck like a noose she'd chosen. She's a danger to decency, Miriam said. She attracts the wrong kind. She does not belong among us. Mary stood at the back, arms loose at her sides, face unreadable. She's raised no family. She honors no Sabbath. She's luring good men with her silence. The room murmured. Some nodded. Some looked down. The air was thick with the weight of polite cruelty. Sheriff Cutter shifted in his chair, but said nothing. Then Silas stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point a finger. I buried my wife 5 years ago. Thought I was done. Thought the rest of life would be chores and silence. He paused, looked around the room. Then one woman reminded my son how to laugh again. All eyes turned. She didn't ask for kindness. She didn't beg for mercy. She carried her shame like firewood, quiet, honest, necessary. Miriam stiffened. You mean to let her stay? I mean to build a fence that goes from her land to mine, and plant every foot of it with iris. He looked at Mary. Because she belongs. Someone in the crowd coughed. Another man shifted and muttered, Let him be, Miriam. The tide turned in a breath. Not loudly, not with cheers, but in the quiet way people decide not to fight anymore. Mary left before the end, slipped out the side door, and walked home with the stars above her and the dirt cool beneath her boots. She didn't cry. Not yet. The next morning, she woke early, packed a bag. Not because she planned to go, but because old habits die slow. Then just before dawn, a knock. She opened the door and found Silas standing there, a wagon behind him. In it, with slats, nails, seed pouches. You leaving? He asked. I was thinking about it. Well, he said, stepping aside. Come help me build something before you do. She laughed, sharp and sudden. They worked until the sun burned high. Together, they laid posts, planted iris bulbs between, let the dog roam between them like a silent witness. Elias joined later with lemonade and a bent grin. No grand speeches. No rings. Just a woman who stayed and a man who finally asked her to. As the final nail drove home, Silas straightened and looked at her. You tired? Bone deep, she said. But you're still here. I'm still here. Evening settled gentle and slow. Elias stood back, arms crossed like his father. Looks like a wall, he said. Looks like a welcome, Mary whispered. Later that night, she sat on her porch. A lantern lit, music box playing somewhere inside. The wind was kind. The land calm. The dog lay at her feet. Silas on the step beside her. He didn't speak for a while. Just held her hand, calloused fingers against hers. They said I was too wild, she murmured. They were right, he said. But that ain't a bad thing. She looked at him, the shape of his face in the soft gold light. I ever tell you what my boy's name was? No. She breathed out. It was Jonah. He squeezed her hand. You still carry him? Every day. Then he's still here too. She nodded. Tears didn't fall, but they filled her eyes. That was enough. Silas leaned his shoulder against hers. They sat like that a long time. The town never came back for her. Not like that. There were still whispers. There always would be. But the fence grew. The flowers bloomed. And the porch light stayed lit. Because some things are too wild to tame, but worth staying for. And someone somewhere will always see you and say, you belong.